In the vast expanse of the ocean, where the horizon meets the sky, a journey began that would forever alter the course of history. Hello and welcome to The Other Side Stories. Here we travel beyond the usual headlines to explore the untold tales of world history, mysteries, turning points, and hidden connections that shaped our planet. If you love discovering how the past still echoes in our present, you're in the right place. Let's uncover the other side of history together. In the year 1492, the world was on the cusp of monumental change. Europe was emerging from the shadows of the Middle Ages, and the Age of Discovery was dawning. At the heart of this transformation was a man whose name would become synonymous with exploration, Christopher Columbus. Born in Genoa, Italy, Columbus was a man driven by ambition and a vision that extended beyond the known world. He believed that by sailing westward, he could find a new route to the East Indies, bypassing the overland routes controlled by rival powers. His proposal was simple yet audacious: sail west to reach the rich markets of Asia. However, Columbus's plan was met with skepticism. Many scholars of the time believed the Earth was flat, and even those who accepted its spherical shape doubted the feasibility of such a voyage. But Columbus was undeterred. He sought support from various European monarchs, but it was Queen Isabella I and King Ferdinand II of Spain who ultimately agreed to sponsor his expedition. On August 3, 1492, Columbus set sail from Palos de la Frontera, Spain, with 3 ships: the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Niña. The journey across the Atlantic was fraught with challenges. The crew faced uncertainty, fear of the unknown, and the vastness of the ocean. Yet Columbus pressed on, driven by his unwavering belief in the success of his mission. After weeks at sea, on October 12, 1492, land was sighted. Columbus had reached an island in the Bahamas, which he named San Salvador, believing he had found a new route to Asia. This moment marked the beginning of European exploration and colonization of the Americas. In the days that followed, Columbus explored the surrounding islands, encountering indigenous peoples who had never before seen Europeans. He described them as friendly and generous, offering them gifts in return for information and supplies. Columbus believed these people to be inhabitants of the East Indies, and he referred to them as Indians. Columbus's landing in the New World set off a chain of events that would have profound and lasting impacts on the indigenous populations of the Americas. The arrival of Europeans brought new technologies, diseases, and cultural changes that would forever alter the course of history. As Columbus continued his voyage, he explored the islands of Cuba and Hispaniola. On Christmas Day, 1492, the Santa Maria ran aground off the coast of Hispaniola. Unable to salvage the ship, Columbus established a settlement named La Navidad, leaving behind a small group of men to maintain a Spanish presence in the New World. Columbus returned to Spain in 1493, bringing with him news of his discoveries. He was hailed as a hero and was granted additional support for further expeditions. Over the next decade, Columbus made 3 more voyages to the Americas, each expanding European knowledge of the New World. Despite his achievements, Columbus's legacy is complex and controversial. While he opened the door for European exploration and colonization, his voyages also led to the exploitation and decimation of indigenous populations. The arrival of Europeans brought diseases that devastated native communities, and the demand for labor led to the enslavement of many indigenous people. Columbus died in 1506, still believing he had found a new route to Asia. It wasn't until later that it was understood that he had encountered a completely unknown continent. His voyages, however, paved the way for the widespread European exploration and colonization of the Americas, changing the world forever. The story of Columbus is a tale of vision, perseverance, and unintended consequences. It serves as a reminder of how a single journey can alter the course of history and shape the world in ways unimaginable at the time. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. If you enjoyed this exploration of Columbus's discovery of the New World, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with fellow explorers. Your support helps us bring more forgotten stories to light. Until next time, keep wondering about the past that shapes our future. This is the first segment of the 10,000-word script. If you'd like to proceed with the next 2,000 words, please let me know. คุณพูดว่าต่อ ChatGPT พูดว่า Absolutely. Here's the next 2,000-word continuation of the script for The Discovery of the New World, 1492, in the same female documentary style. As we look deeper into the voyages of Columbus, it is essential to understand the world he left behind and the motivations that drove European monarchs to fund such risky endeavors. The 15th century was an era of immense change. Europe was emerging from centuries of relative stagnation and conflict, spurred by the Renaissance, a period of renewed interest in learning, science, and art. Maritime technology had advanced. Navigational instruments such as the astrolabe and improved maps allowed sailors to traverse longer distances with greater accuracy. The dream of reaching distant lands for trade, wealth, and prestige became irresistible for kingdoms eager to expand their influence. Spain, newly unified under Ferdinand and Isabella, saw exploration as a means to compete with rival powers, such as Portugal, which had already established maritime routes around Africa to access Asian spices. The wealth of Asia, its gold, silver, silks, and spices, was legendary, and European markets were eager to tap into these treasures. Columbus's plan promised not only commercial gain, but also a chance for Spain to assert itself as a global power. Columbus, however, underestimated the scale of the Atlantic and overestimated the proximity of Asia to Europe by sailing west. He carried with him a deeply rooted belief in his calculations and a vision of fame and fortune. The crew of his ships, while motivated by the promise of reward, faced tremendous uncertainty. Many had never sailed beyond familiar coastal waters. Morale was fragile, and discontent often simmered beneath the surface, as provisions dwindled and weeks stretched into months without sight of land. The crossing of the Atlantic was marked by a tension between hope and despair. Storms battered the ships, winds shifted unexpectedly, and the fear of the unknown haunted the sailors. Yet, Columbus's leadership, determination, and ability to maintain a vision of discovery helped to keep the expedition together. When land was finally sighted on October 12, 1492, the relief and excitement was palpable. The island Columbus named San Salvador became a symbol of new beginnings, though it was only the first of countless lands that European explorers would encounter in the Americas. To Columbus, each new island, present-day Cuba and Hispaniola among them, offered evidence that he was nearing the fabled lands of the East. The indigenous populations Columbus encountered were diverse and complex, with rich cultural traditions, social hierarchies, and knowledge systems that had evolved over centuries. Yet, Columbus viewed them through a lens shaped by his own cultural and religious background, seeing them as potential converts to Christianity and as labor sources. This perspective would have profound consequences in the decades that followed. Columbus's first encounters with the indigenous peoples were characterized by a mixture of curiosity and misunderstanding. He marveled at their customs, their attire, and their apparent generosity, noting their willingness to exchange goods such as gold trinkets, food, and ornaments. However, these early interactions were also the beginning of a pattern: the imposition of European values, the pursuit of wealth, and the displacement of native peoples. As the weeks passed, Columbus navigated treacherous waters, exploring coastlines, rivers, and bays. These records, while incomplete and often biased, became the foundation for European knowledge of the New World. Cartographers and chroniclers would later rely on Columbus's reports to map the Americas, sometimes exaggerating his findings or misinterpreting his observations. The grounding of the Santa Maria on Christmas Day 1492 marked a turning point. With the ship lost, Columbus made the strategic decision to establish La Navidad, a foothold for Spanish presence in the New World. Leaving men behind to maintain the settlement was a calculated risk, aimed at securing Spain's claim to the territory. Yet, the fate of La Navidad illustrated the fragility of European ventures in unfamiliar lands. Conflicts with local populations, misunderstandings, and the harsh realities of life in a new environment would soon lead to the destruction of the settlement. Columbus's return to Spain in 1493 was met with both celebration and political maneuvering. He was greeted as a hero, his discoveries promising fame, fortune, and the expansion of Spanish influence. The Spanish crown quickly organized further expeditions, providing more ships, supplies, and personnel for the continued exploration of the Caribbean and eventually the mainland of the Americas. Yet, Columbus's later voyages were not without controversy. Disputes over governance, treatment of indigenous peoples, and his own leadership style caused tension among the colonists and between Columbus and the Spanish monarchy. Reports of brutality, forced labor, and mismanagement tarnished his reputation, though his achievements as an explorer remained undeniable. The duality of Columbus's legacy, a mix of courage, vision, and the onset of exploitation, reflects the broader complexities of European expansion during this period. The impact of Columbus's voyages cannot be overstated. They initiated a wave of exploration, conquest, and colonization that would reshape the globe. European nations, inspired by Spain's success, sent explorers to map, claim, and exploit new territories. The Columbian Exchange, as historians later named it, transformed the Columbus's subsequent voyages further expanded European understanding of the Americas. In 1493, he returned to the Caribbean with a larger fleet, intent on establishing settlements, securing resources, and asserting Spain's claim. This expedition included over 1,200 men, ships laden with supplies, and a mandate to govern the newly discovered territories. The scale of this voyage reflected Spain's growing ambitions and the increasing importance of the New World in European geopolitics. Upon arrival, Columbus encountered a landscape both familiar and foreign. The islands were rich in resources, fertile lands, abundant forests, and diverse wildlife, but also posed immense challenges. Establishing settlements required negotiating with indigenous communities, managing limited supplies, and contending with the unpredictable Caribbean climate. Harsh hurricanes, unfamiliar diseases, and logistical difficulties tested the resilience of the colonists. Yet, Columbus's leadership and navigational skills enabled the Spanish to maintain footholds in the region. One of the primary objectives of this second voyage was the extraction of wealth. The Spanish sought gold, spices, and other valuable resources, aiming to enrich both the crown and the colonists. Columbus imposed labor systems on the indigenous populations, seeking to integrate them into the economic framework of the Spanish Empire. This often involved coercion, forced labor, and the restructuring of social hierarchies. While these measures were intended to ensure economic productivity, they led to suffering, resistance, and cultural disruption among native communities. The establishment of settlements such as Isabela on Hispaniola marked a significant step in the colonization process. These early towns served as administrative centers, trade hubs, and strategic locations for further exploration. They were also sites of conflict, as disputes among settlers, clashes with indigenous peoples, and challenges of survival created tensions that tested the governance structures Columbus implemented. During these expeditions, Columbus and his men began to map the islands more systematically, documenting coastlines, rivers, and harbors. These charts would become invaluable to future explorers, providing a foundation for navigation, colonization, and trade. Columbus's meticulous observations of flora, fauna, and human societies contributed to Europe's growing knowledge of the Americas, although interpretations were often filtered through European assumptions and cultural biases. Columbus's later voyages also included attempts to reach the mainland of the Americas. While he initially believed he had reached islands near Asia, encounters with larger landmasses eventually demonstrated the existence of a vast and previously unknown continent. These explorations revealed diverse ecosystems, complex civilizations, and new economic opportunities, further fueling European ambitions. Despite these achievements, Columbus faced significant criticism and political challenges. Reports of mismanagement, mistreatment of indigenous peoples, and internal disputes among colonists reached Spain. The Crown appointed governors and inspectors to oversee the colonies, sometimes bypassing Columbus's authority. Conflicts over leadership, jurisdiction, and the distribution of wealth led to legal disputes, tarnishing his reputation despite his role as a pioneering explorer. The impact of Columbus's voyages extended beyond immediate political and economic concerns. The Columbian Exchange, a term later coined by historians, describes the global transfer of plants, animals, cultures, and diseases that followed European contact with the Americas. Crops such as maize, potatoes, and tomatoes were introduced to Europe, Africa, and Asia, transforming diets and agricultural practices. Conversely, Europeans brought wheat, sugar, livestock, and other resources to the New World, reshaping landscapes and economies. However, the exchange was not solely beneficial. Diseases brought by Europeans devastated indigenous populations, resulting in dramatic demographic shifts. Smallpox, influenza, and measles spread rapidly, often preceding European settlers and undermining the stability of native societies. Entire communities were decimated and cultural traditions were disrupted. The introduction of European systems of governance, religion, and labor further transformed indigenous life, sometimes eroding traditional social structures. The moral and ethical implications of Columbus's expeditions have been debated for centuries. While his achievements in navigation, exploration, and mapping are undeniable, the consequences of his actions, exploitation, displacement, and disease highlight the complexities of historical progress. Columbus's legacy serves as a reminder that the pursuit of discovery often carries unintended consequences, affecting peoples, cultures, and ecosystems in ways beyond the control of any single individual. Columbus's voyages also inspired a wave of exploration by other European powers. Portugal, Spain, England, France, and the Netherlands dispatched explorers to claim territories, establish trade routes, and extract resources. Figures such as Amerigo Vespucci, John Cabot, and Ferdinand Magellan expanded the European presence across the Atlantic and beyond, laying the groundwork for a global network of commerce, colonization, and cultural exchange. The maps and knowledge generated by these explorations transformed the European worldview. The recognition of the Americas as distinct continents challenged pre-existing geographical assumptions, reshaping ideas about the world's size, diversity, and interconnectedness. Scholars, cartographers, and navigators incorporated this new information into atlases, guiding subsequent voyages and informing the strategies of empires seeking to dominate distant lands. Over time, the colonization of the Americas had profound economic consequences. Spain extracted vast quantities of gold and silver, fueling European economies and contributing to the rise of global capitalism. Trade networks expanded, linking Europe, the Americas, Africa, and Asia in a complex system of commerce, migration, and cultural exchange. The demand for labor to sustain plantations and mining operations led to the forced migration of millions of Africans, further complicating the demographic and social landscape of the New World. Cultural exchange during this period was multifaceted. European settlers brought languages, religions, and artistic traditions, while indigenous peoples introduced agricultural techniques, craftsmanship, and knowledge of local ecosystems. Hybrid cultures emerged, blending elements from Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Despite the violence and disruption associated with colonization, these exchanges contributed to the development of new identities, societies, and traditions that continue to influence the Americas today. The environmental impact of European exploration was equally significant. Colonization led to deforestation, the introduction of non-native species, and the alteration of landscapes to support agriculture, settlements, and resource extraction. These changes transformed ecosystems, affecting biodiversity and the availability of natural resources for both indigenous populations and settlers. Throughout this transformative period, the story of Columbus stands as a symbol of human ambition, curiosity, and resilience. His voyages exemplify the drive to explore the unknown, confront challenges, and expand the boundaries of knowledge. Yet, they also illustrate the ethical complexities of discovery and the consequences of imposing one culture upon another. By examining Columbus's legacy, we gain insight into the broader processes of exploration, colonization, and globalization. The 15th century marked a turning point in world history, as the discovery of the New World set in motion social, economic, and cultural changes that continue to resonate today. The narratives of explorers, settlers, and indigenous peoples intersect to reveal a story of opportunity, conflict, and transformation. Columbus's achievements in navigation and maritime exploration demonstrated the power of human ingenuity and perseverance. He utilized celestial navigation, knowledge of wind patterns, and careful observation to traverse the Atlantic. His voyages inspired innovation in ship design, cartography, and navigational techniques, influencing subsequent generations of explorers. At the same time, the consequences for indigenous populations highlight the costs of European expansion. The devastation wrought by disease, forced labor, and cultural disruption remind us that exploration is not with human consequences. Understanding this duality is essential for a balanced perspective on history, acknowledging both the achievements and the suffering associated with European colonization. The discovery of the New World reshaped not only Europe and the Americas, but also the global order. It initiated a period of intensive competition among European powers, leading to centuries of exploration, conquest, and empire building. The redistribution of wealth, the introduction of new crops and resources, and the integration of global trade networks transformed economies and societies on an unprecedented scale. Education, science, and culture were also influenced by the discovery of the Americas. The influx of new knowledge, plants, and animals expanded European understanding of the natural world, contributing to advancements in agriculture, medicine, and science. Artistic and literary representations of the New World inspired creativity, imagination, and curiosity, influencing European culture and thought for generations. As the 16th century unfolded, the initial voyages of Columbus catalyzed an era of unprecedented European expansion. Spain, empowered by the promise of wealth and strategic advantage, intensified its presence in the Caribbean, establishing colonies, forts, and trade networks. These early settlements served as basis for further exploration and laid the groundwork for Spain's eventual dominance across much of the Americas. The consequences for indigenous populations became increasingly severe. European arrival disrupted social structures, governance, and daily life. Diseases previously unknown in the Americas spread rapidly, often killing more people than conflicts or labor demands. Populations that had thrived for centuries faced decimation, leaving profound gaps in cultural continuity and societal organization. Despite this, indigenous communities adapted in various ways, resisting, negotiating, or blending European influences with their own traditions. The subsequent voyages of Columbus and other explorers broadened European awareness of the New World. Columbus himself returned to the Americas on 3 additional expeditions between 1493 and 1504, charting new islands, coastlines, and river systems. On these voyages, he navigated the complex realities of colonial administration, managing settlers, interacting with local populations, and seeking resources for Spain. His experiences illuminated the challenges of governance in distant lands, including disputes over authority, logistics, and the moral dilemmas of conquest. Other explorers, inspired by Columbus, ventured deeper into the Americas. Amerigo Vespucci's explorations revealed that the lands discovered by Columbus were not part of Asia, but a distinct continent, ultimately giving rise to the name America. John Cabot reached the northern parts of the continent, while Vasco Núñez de Balboa crossed the Isthmus of Panama to view the Pacific Ocean, revealing the vastness of the continents and the opportunities they held. These voyages collectively expanded Europe's geographical knowledge and fueled further imperial ambitions. The Columbian Exchange, a direct consequence of these discoveries, reshaped the world. Crops native to the Americas, maize, potatoes, tomatoes, cacao, revolutionized European agriculture and diets, creating new economic opportunities and supporting population growth. In turn, Europeans brought wheat, sugarcane, livestock, and technologies to the Americas, transforming landscapes and economies. Yet the exchange was also catastrophic. Diseases such as smallpox, measles, and influenza spread among native populations with devastating effects, often wiping out entire communities. The economic impact of these discoveries was equally profound. Spain extracted immense wealth from its colonies, particularly in the form of gold and silver, fueling its European dominance and influencing the emerging capitalist economy. The influx of precious metals contributed to inflation, trade expansion, and the rise of global commerce. Trade routes linking Europe, the Americas, Africa, and Asia interconnected the world in ways previously unimaginable, shaping international relations, commerce, and cultural exchange. European colonization brought complex cultural interactions. Indigenous traditions, knowledge, and languages were often suppressed or transformed, while European religion, legal systems, and customs were imposed. However, syncretism also occurred. African, European, and indigenous influences merged, creating new cultural expressions, culinary traditions, and societal structures. These hybrid cultures persist today, testifying to the enduring impact of these early encounters. The environmental consequences of European expansion were significant. Colonization led to deforestation, changes in agriculture, and the introduction of non-native species. Settlements transformed ecosystems, sometimes reducing biodiversity and altering the availability of resources for both humans and wildlife. The long term of these ecological changes were profound, shaping land use, agriculture, and natural habitats across continents. Columbus's voyages also set in motion the institutionalization of exploration. The Spanish crown and other European powers created administrative structures, legal codes, and governance systems to manage colonies. The encomienda system, which granted Spanish settlers the right to extract labor from indigenous populations, exemplified the blending of European authority with colonial economic needs. While these structures facilitated control and resource extraction, they also entrenched inequalities and exploitation. The religious dimension of European expansion cannot be overlooked. Missionaries accompanied explorers to convert indigenous populations to Christianity. The spread of European religious beliefs transformed cultural practices, ceremonies, and social organization. For many native communities, these changes were imposed through coercion or assimilation, creating lasting tensions between traditional beliefs and imposed European religion. Columbus himself became a figure of debate and symbolism. Celebrated as a bold explorer, he epitomized human curiosity and the drive to discover new horizons. Yet, his actions also inaugurated centuries of conquest, colonization, and suffering for indigenous populations. His story embodies the duality of discovery, the exhilaration of knowledge, and the ethical consequences of expansion. Understanding this duality is essential to comprehending the historical significance of the era. The ripple effects of Columbus's discoveries extended far beyond the Caribbean. European powers began to explore the mainland of the Americas, from the southern tip of South America to the forests of North America. Spanish explorers, conquistadors, and settlers gradually extended control over vast territories, encountering complex civilizations such as the Aztec and Inca empires. These encounters combined diplomacy, trade, and violent conquest, fundamentally altering the political and cultural landscapes of the continent. The introduction of European technology, including firearms, metal tools, and ships, altered the balance of power among native societies. Some indigenous groups leveraged these tools in conflicts or alliances, while others suffered under military pressure. European legal frameworks, concepts of land ownership, and governance structures disrupted traditional systems, contributing to the reorganization of societies across the Americas. Economic motivations drove the colonization process. Gold, silver, spices, and agricultural products became central to European wealth and power. Plantations were established to cultivate sugarcane, tobacco, and other cash crops, often relying on forced labor from indigenous populations and later African slaves. This exploitation created social hierarchies and entrenched inequality, setting patterns that persisted centuries. Columbus's voyages also transformed European imagination and scholarship. Cartography, geography, and navigation flourished as explorers provided new data about the size, shape, and diversity of the Americas. Scholars, artists, and writers drew inspiration from reports of exotic lands, peoples, and resources. These narratives fueled curiosity, scientific inquiry, and cultural production across Europe, contributing to the intellectual vibrancy of the Renaissance. The legacy of the New World's discovery is multifaceted. On one hand, it represents human ingenuity, courage, and the desire to explore. On the other, it reveals the consequences of cultural imposition, disease, and exploitation. The juxtaposition of these outcomes offers lessons for understanding historical processes. Discovery is rarely neutral, and human ambition often comes with unintended costs. As European empires expanded, they also competed for influence, colonization, and trade. Conflicts arose over territorial claims, resources, and strategic advantage. Treaties, such as the Treaty of Tordesillas, divided lands between Spain and Portugal, while later rivalries between England, France, and the Netherlands shaped the geopolitical landscape of the Americas. This competition catalyzed exploration, settlement, and the spread of European institutions, while also generating conflict with indigenous populations and among colonial powers themselves. The story of the New World is also a story of adaptation and survival. Indigenous populations, while suffering immense losses, preserved cultural practices, adapted to new realities, and influenced the development of colonial societies. Their knowledge of agriculture, navigation, and local ecosystems became invaluable to European settlers, illustrating the interdependence and exchange in the encounter between worlds. By the early 16th century, the Americas were increasingly connected to Europe, Africa, and Asia. Trade networks, migration, and the movement of goods, ideas, and people created a proto-global system, laying the foundation for modern globalization. The economic, social, and cultural impacts of these early centuries continue to resonate, demonstrating the enduring significance of Columbus's voyages and the era they inaugurated. As the centuries progressed, the reverberations of Columbus's voyages became ever more apparent. The New World, once a distant and unknown realm, became a stage for European ambition, trade, and cultural exchange. Spain's early dominance in the Americas set a precedent, demonstrating the potential rewards of exploration and colonization, but also revealing the ethical and human costs involved. The duality of this legacy, glory and exploitation, curiosity and conquest, would define the European encounter with the Americas for generations. The settlements established by Columbus and his successors served as springboards for further exploration. Ports and forts enabled the projection of Spanish influence into surrounding islands and, eventually, onto the mainland. Explorers such as Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro would follow paths first charted by Columbus, encountering complex civilizations such as the Aztec and Inca empires. These encounters brought tremendous wealth to Spain, but they also involved violent conquest, disruption of societies, and profound human suffering. The transformation of indigenous societies was rapid and far-reaching. The introduction of European languages, religion, and governance structures often supplanted traditional systems. Missionaries sought to convert populations to Christianity, sometimes through persuasion, other times through coercion. Educational institutions, churches, and administrative centers became instruments of cultural assimilation. Yet, even in the face of such upheaval, indigenous peoples maintained aspects of their cultural identity, creating a syncretic blending of traditions that survives to this day. Economically, the Americas became a cornerstone of European power. The influx of precious metals, agricultural products, and raw materials fueled Spain's economy and financed further expansion. Trade routes connecting Europe, the Americas, Africa, and Asia created a web of intercontinental exchange, linking distant societies in a shared system of commerce and influence. The wealth derived from the New World reshaped European politics, fueling conflicts over territory and power and supporting the rise of nation-states with global ambitions. The human cost of these developments was immense. Indigenous populations faced disease, forced labor, and displacement on a scale previously unseen. The combination of smallpox, measles, and influenza decimated communities, often before sustained European settlements were fully established. Social structures, cultural practices, and oral traditions were disrupted or destroyed. In some regions, entire civilizations were fundamentally altered or eradicated, leaving a legacy of trauma and loss that reverberates across centuries. Simultaneously, the Columbian Exchange brought benefits alongside devastation. New crops such as maize, potatoes, and cacao enriched European diets and agriculture, while European livestock, grains, and technologies transformed the Americas. Cultural exchange manifested in art, language, music, and cuisine, creating hybrid societies that reflected both continuity and adaptation. These exchanges illustrate the complex interplay between discovery, adaptation, and transformation in the encounter with worlds. Columbus himself remains a figure of intense debate. Celebrated for his navigational skills, courage, and role in connecting continents, he is also criticized for his role in initiating colonial exploitation and the suffering of indigenous peoples. Modern historiography seeks to balance these perspectives, acknowledging both his achievements and the consequences of his actions. The discussion of Columbus's legacy serves as a broader reflection on how societies evaluate historical figures, weighing exploration and innovation against ethical considerations and human impact. The navigational feats of Columbus inspired a generation of explorers. Figures such as John Cabot, Amerigo Vespucci, and Ferdinand Magellan expanded European knowledge of the globe, mapping coastlines, rivers, and islands with increasing precision. These explorations revealed the vastness and diversity of the Americas, leading to further colonization, trade, and cultural exchange. The interconnectedness of continents, peoples, and ecosystems became a defining characteristic of the emerging global order. Culturally, the discovery of the New World fueled imagination and creativity. Literature, art, and scholarship reflected both the fascination and anxieties associated with exploration. Accounts of exotic lands, unknown peoples, and strange customs captivated European audiences, inspiring maps, illustrations, and narratives that shaped perceptions of distant territories. These cultural productions helped to construct a European understanding of the world that blended observation, interpretation, and imagination. The environmental impact of colonization was equally profound. The introduction of new species, agricultural practices, and land management strategies transformed landscapes. Forests were cleared for plantations, rivers were redirected, and ecosystems were altered to support European settlement and resource extraction. These changes affected not only biodiversity, but also the long-term sustainability of agricultural and social systems, demonstrating the far-reaching consequences of human expansion. Political structures in the New World evolved under European influence. Colonies were governed by appointed officials, with legal systems reflecting European norms. These institutions facilitated administration, resource extraction, and defense, but also entrenched inequalities, favoring settlers over indigenous populations. Over time, these governance structures laid the foundations for modern political entities, while simultaneously embedding historical patterns of social hierarchy and power imbalances. The legacies of the discovery of the New World are manifold. Economically, culturally, and environmentally, the encounter reshaped the Americas and Europe alike. The initial voyages of Columbus ignited centuries of exploration, conquest, and colonization that interconnected continents and peoples in ways that would define the modern world. These changes were profound, complex, and often contradictory, combining innovation, adaptation, suffering, and resilience. Columbus's narrative reminds us of the human capacity for curiosity, courage, and vision. His determination to sail beyond the known, despite skepticism and peril, exemplifies the drive to expand horizons and explore the unknown. Yet it also underscores the responsibilities inherent in discovery, the ethical and humanitarian implications of encountering new worlds and peoples. The story of 1492 is thus both inspiring and cautionary, illustrating the potential and consequences of human ambition. Over time, historians, scholars, and educators have sought to contextualize the discovery of the New World. They examine Columbus not merely as an individual, but as part of broader social, political, and economic systems. The voyages of 1492 and the decades that followed are understood within the framework of European expansion, imperial competition, and cultural encounter, highlighting both agency and consequence. The impact on subsequent generations was transformative. The Americas became a site of ongoing exploration, trade, and settlement. European scientific, technological, and cultural advancements were intertwined with the knowledge, resources, and labor of the New World. Indigenous communities adapted, resisted, and influenced colonial development, leaving enduring imprints on societies, languages, and cultures. This complex interplay of continuity and change illustrates the multidimensional effects of exploration and colonization. As we reflect on the discovery of the New World, we recognize the interconnectedness of history. The voyages of Columbus initiated a process that connected continents, transformed economies, reshaped societies, and altered the natural environment. The narratives of explorers, settlers, and indigenous peoples intersect to create a story of discovery, conflict, adaptation, and transformation that continues to resonate in the present. Ultimately, the legacy of Columbus and the New World is a story of human ambition and its consequences. It reminds us that exploration is not only a journey across physical spaces, but also across cultural, ethical, and historical terrains. The events of 1492 set in motion changes that reverberate across centuries, shaping economies, societies, and cultures in ways that remain visible today. The story invites reflection on the complexities of progress. Discovery and expansion bring knowledge, wealth, and innovation, but they also carry the potential for harm, disruption, and ethical dilemmas. Understanding the discovery of the New World requires grappling with these dualities, appreciating the courage and vision of explorers while acknowledging the profound consequences for the peoples and ecosystems they encountered. As we conclude this journey, it is clear that the events of 1492 were a turning point in world history. Columbus's voyage across the Atlantic not only connected continents, but also reshaped the trajectory of human civilization. The interplay of exploration, cultural encounter, and transformation continues to inform our understanding of history, reminding us that the past is both a guide and a mirror for our present and future. Thanks for watching The Other Side Stories. If you enjoyed this journey through history's hidden paths, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with fellow explorers. Your support helps us bring more forgotten stories to light. Until next time, keep wondering about the past that shapes our future. In the year 1492, the world was on the cusp of monumental change. Europe was emerging from the shadows of the Middle Ages, and the age of discovery was dawning. At the heart of this transformation was a man whose name would become synonymous with exploration, Christopher Columbus. Born in Genoa, Italy, Columbus was a man driven by ambition and a vision that extended beyond the known world. He believed that by sailing westward, he could find a new route to the East Indies, bypassing the overland routes controlled by rival powers. His proposal was simple, yet audacious: sail west to reach the rich markets of Asia. However, Columbus's plan was met with skepticism. Many scholars of the time believed the Earth was flat, and even those who accepted its spherical shape doubted the feasibility of such a voyage. But Columbus was undeterred. He sought support from various European monarchs, but it was Queen Isabella I and King Ferdinand II of Spain who ultimately agreed to sponsor his expedition. On August 3, 1492, Columbus set sail from Palos de la Frontera, Spain, with 3 ships, the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Niña. The journey across the Atlantic was fraught with challenges. The crew faced uncertainty, fear of the unknown, and the vastness of the ocean. Yet Columbus pressed on, driven by his unwavering belief in the success of his mission. After weeks at sea, on October 12, 1492, land was sighted. Columbus had reached an island in the Bahamas, which he named San Salvador, believing he had found a new route to Asia. This moment marked the beginning of European exploration and colonization of the Americas. In the days that followed, Columbus explored the surrounding islands, encountering indigenous peoples who had never before seen Europeans. He described them as friendly and generous, offering them gifts in return for information and supplies. Columbus believed these people to be inhabitants of the East Indies, and he referred to them as Indians. Columbus's landing in the New World set off a chain of events that would have profound and lasting impacts on the indigenous populations of the Americas. The arrival of Europeans brought new technologies, diseases, and cultural changes that would forever alter the course of history. As Columbus continued his voyage, he explored the islands of Cuba and Hispaniola. On Christmas Day, 1492, the Santa Maria ran aground off the coast of Hispaniola. Unable to salvage the ship, Columbus established a settlement named La Navidad, leaving behind a small group of men to maintain a Spanish presence in the New World. Columbus returned to Spain in 1493, bringing with him news of his discoveries. He was hailed as a hero and was granted additional support for further expeditions. Over the next decade, Columbus made 3 more voyages to the Americas, each expanding European knowledge of the New World. Despite his achievements, Columbus's legacy is complex and controversial. While he opened the door for European exploration and colonization, his voyages also led to the exploitation and decimation of indigenous populations. The arrival of Europeans brought diseases, cultural changes, and forced labor that would forever alter the course of history. Columbus died in 1506, still believing he had found a new route to Asia. It wasn't until later that it was understood he had encountered a completely unknown continent. His voyages, however, paved the way for the widespread European exploration and colonization of the Americas, changing the world forever. The story of Columbus is a tale of vision, perseverance, and unintended consequences. It serves as a reminder of how a single journey can alter the course of history and shape the world in ways unimaginable at the time. Europe at the close of the 15th century was a continent on the move. Maritime technology had improved, political alliances were shifting, and the Renaissance had fostered curiosity about the world beyond Europe. Spain, newly unified under Ferdinand and Isabella, sought to compete with Portugal, whose navigators had already charted routes around Africa to Asia. The desire to access spices, gold, and other riches drove European exploration, making the funding of Columbus's voyage both a strategic and economic decision. Columbus, convinced of a westward route to Asia, had to contend with skepticism. Many believed the ocean too vast, others feared the unknown dangers of uncharted seas. The crew, meanwhile, faced isolation, storms, and dwindling supplies, testing the limits of endurance and morale. Yet, Columbus's leadership maintained cohesion, his vision of discovery offering hope amid uncertainty. The first sight of land on October 12, 1492, ignited a mixture of awe and relief. Columbus, thinking he had reached islands near Asia, named the land San Salvador. The islands he explored were rich with resources, landscapes, and cultures unfamiliar to Europeans. Interactions with indigenous peoples, while initially friendly, would set patterns of exchange, misunderstanding, and exploitation that characterized European colonization. The grounding of the Santa Maria led to the establishment of La Navidad, Spain's first foothold in the Americas. Leaving men behind, Columbus ensured a continued presence and claim, though the settlement faced challenges from resource scarcity and tensions with indigenous communities. His return to Spain heralded fame and royal favor, enabling larger expeditions in subsequent years. Columbus's voyages inspired European curiosity and ambition. Subsequent explorers, like John Cabot and Amerigo Vespucci, expanded knowledge of the Americas, confirming it was not Asia but an entirely new continent. The maps, observations, and reports from these expeditions shaped European understanding, commerce, and global strategies. However, the impact on indigenous populations was catastrophic. Diseases such as smallpox spread rapidly, decimating communities. Social structures, cultural practices, and economies were disrupted. Forced labor systems, colonization, and the imposition of European governance and religion further transformed societies, often violently. Yet, resilience persisted, with indigenous knowledge, culture, and adaptation influencing colonial development and survival. The Columbian Exchange reshaped global agriculture and diets. Crops from the Americas, including maize, potatoes, and cacao, transformed Europe, Africa, and Asia. Conversely, Europeans introduced livestock, grains, and technologies that reshaped the Americas. While this exchange promoted innovation and growth, it also brought profound demographic and ecological consequences. Economically, the New World fueled European wealth and global trade. Precious metals, agricultural products, and raw materials flowed into Europe, altering political power, commerce, and industry. Colonies became integral to empire building, connecting distant continents and creating a new global system. The establishment of Spanish colonies initiated patterns of governance, exploitation, and cultural imposition that would characterize the European presence in the Americas. Settlements such as Isabela on Hispaniola served as administrative centers, trade hubs, and military posts, securing claims and facilitating further exploration. Conflicts among settlers, challenges of survival, and interactions with indigenous populations tested leadership and revealed the complexities of sustaining European presence in foreign lands. Columbus's later voyages sought both exploration and consolidation. Mapping coastlines, rivers, and islands, he gathered knowledge crucial for subsequent expeditions. Encounters with native populations involved negotiation, coercion, and cultural exchange, illustrating the ethical tensions inherent in European expansion. Reports of mismanagement and cruelty reached Spain, complicating Columbus's reputation while leaving an indelible mark on the history of colonization. The Columbian Exchange's profound effects reshaped societies on both sides of the Atlantic. New crops, animals, and technologies created opportunities for innovation and growth, while disease, displacement, and labor exploitation wrought devastation. Indigenous populations faced catastrophic population loss, cultural upheaval, and environmental disruption, illustrating the intertwined consequences of exploration and colonization. European ambitions intensified, prompting further voyages of discovery. Figures like Vasco Núñez de Balboa and Hernán Cortés expanded Spanish influence onto the mainland, encountering powerful civilizations and establishing wealth extraction systems. Conquistadors leveraged European military technology and strategies, often exploiting divisions within indigenous societies. These expeditions reinforced the dual nature of exploration: ingenuity and conquest, curiosity and subjugation. Cultural exchange flourished even amid conflict. Indigenous knowledge of agriculture, medicine, and ecology influenced colonial practices, while European religion, law, and customs transformed societal structures. Hybrid cultures emerged, blending European, African, and indigenous elements in language, art, and daily life. These cultural adaptations illustrate the resilience and creativity of human societies in the face of profound change. Environmental transformation accompanied human activity. European introduced species, land use practices, and settlements reshaped ecosystems. Deforestation, altered waterways, and the introduction of non-native crops and livestock modified landscapes, influencing biodiversity and sustainability. The political and legal frameworks implemented by European powers established precedents for colonial governance,